I want to thank all of you who've chosen to participate with us today. For those of you, I think everybody on the list I have met, but just in case, I'm Roger Piran. I'm one of the co-founders of Talent Intelligent, and I am delighted today that one of our associates has been willing to take on a topic that's near and dear to the work that I do when I'm facilitating or trying to do leadership development, and on occasion when I'm coaching, I look for ways to introduce humor, not only because it makes a difference in the way people can open up and hear information and share, but also we know, in fact, there have been some neurological studies that show that when people elevate their mood, they actually are more efficient learners. Now, we all know that using humor is a delicate thing. If a person is not careful, the humor they use, in fact, could create more problems for them as a manager or a leader. And being sensitive to what I would think of as the artful use of humor is very important. I've had the privilege of knowing Paul for a number of decades now, and I have enjoyed so many of his different presentations where he's very cleverly and artfully integrated humor into the work that he's doing. And he's now, in fact, found some resources that he's able to make available to people like us who want to figure out ways to utilize using humor in our work. So Paul, I'm going to turn it over to you and let you take it away. And thank you so much for your willingness to give us the time and sharing of your knowledge today.
Roger, as always, thank you. A very generous and gracious introduction. And I sincerely want to thank you for not introducing me as the very funny Paul Damiano. They were doing an interview once with Jerry Seinfeld, and they said, and he grew up on the doing a lot of stand-up comedy and everything, and talking about how tough it is. And the interviewer said, well, Jerry, is there any kind of common theme or anything that ever happens to you that's kind of like the kiss of death for you? And he says, oh my God, yeah. When I'm introduced as the very funny Jerry Seinfeld. So thank you for setting the bar very low, Roger, for me today. I appreciate that. Sincerely, I want to thank all of you for being here. I recognize some of your names and faces from the email and from the login. I know we've only got a short amount of time. I wish I could say hi and kind of meet all of you individually. If you could, in the chat box, though, just maybe quickly say where you're calling in from for two reasons. That may give folks a sense of a little bit of the geographic spread, but also we can make sure our chat box is working, which will be critical for what we want to do later. There we go. Fantastic. Winston-Salem, Dallas, Michigan, St. Louis, Chicago, Minneapolis, Boston, Illinois. Fantastic, fantastic. Okay, great. And right now, how many total people do we have online? I'm trying to get a sense of that as well. 14. Okay, great. Thank you. Well, as folks roll in, we'll continue to invite them into the chat. Well, again, Roger, great introduction about the topic of humor. So, I entitled today's, as you put out, elevating moods and accelerating learning, and I put it's no laughing matter. And I mean that a bit tongue in cheek, of course, is that obviously humor is to make people laugh and to engage, but it's no laughing matter in that it can be serious in that what it can do in a workplace environment. For those of you who don't know me, very high level and quickly about my background, by academic training, I'm an industrial and organizational psychologist. I've been in practice for about 28 years. I'm coming to you live from Greensboro, North Carolina. I moved here about 21 years ago to go work for the Center for Creative Leadership. I was on staff with them for 7 years, and then went out on my own to form what's called Good Works Consulting, and I've been doing that 14 years or so. I am a very proud affiliate of Talent Intelligent, and as Roger said, I've known him and some of the folks affiliated with him for years as well. He also mentioned that he has, seen me in programs or seminars or presentations and trying to integrate or use humor. And I will say that that has been true about me, kind of about my whole life and my approach to the work that I do. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. I want to say today, very high level, what I hope that you all get out of today, or we get out of it. And it's what Roger alluded to, humor can be useful if it's used effectively. And so that's one thing I hope to do today, is to talk about how to use it effectively, appropriately, and intentionality, with intentionality. And I want to do that primarily today by talking about a card deck called Funny Business, which I'll obviously refer to in a bit. And then give you some process methodology for using cartoons in a few different contexts. So for example, I know today on the line, we have folks who are internal HR, we have external consultants, we have coaches, we may have bosses or team leaders or so forth. People kind of who approach and interface with business and business people from some different perspectives. And so I'll talk about how humor can be used at least in a couple of those different contexts today as well. Now, another thing you'll be pleased to know since today, that given that you're all incredibly bright people, I'm not going to read slides to you. And that said, I think some of us maybe don't necessarily appreciate the full continuum or range, if you will, of what using humor, using it appropriately can do in the workplace. There's really one I want to highlight here, and that's the first one. This quote by Mark Twain, humor's good-natured side of truth. And I have found in my consulting and coaching practice and training and facilitation work that I do, when I'm able to implement or institute a piece of humor or something funny or humorous, ultimately, I believe it actually helps people get to larger and deeper truths, that the humor becomes the catalyst, the conduit by which a deeper truth can be uncovered or exposed. And for me, that's been the biggest utility of it. I think there's a lot of utility in being funny or using humor for humor's sake. I think it does a lot of good things by itself, but in the context of today and these cards called Funny Business, they were designed with some intentionality around more than just trying to get people to laugh and to be amused together. You can see some of the other things there. The other one that I really, the other one I will point out is, again, around helping people lower defense mechanisms. We'll talk more about that, but also this notion of staying in our memory longer. Sometimes I'll use a humor or cartoon in a program or in a coaching engagement or something, and I may run into that person a year or 2 or 3 or 5 years later, and I'll say, hey, I promise not to be insulted. Tell me what, if anything, you remember about our work together, or about that class, or about that program, or about that initiative, or about when I was working with your team. And sometimes they can barely remember who I am, but they go, oh my God, you showed that cartoon about blah, blah, blah. Or you showed that video about something that was funny. And it's amazing to me how durable humor is with folks and how long it stays with them. And again, if we can take that and convert it into some learning moments and learning opportunities, then I think as coaches and consultants and HR folks, we have a real ability to make some difference. Now, I'll admit to you that for me, humor has always been kind of part of my life. It was very much a part of my personality growing up. And so it was something that came easy for me, humor, or as my spouse would say, I'm just really a smartass. And so I don't know if I deserve any special credit or awards for having that orientation, but I always have. But it's something very natural for me. Now, I got to say, that said, I had been using humor for years in my business and my practice, and then my life got totally validated. My existence found meaning thanks to Roger and Bob Eichinger and all those good folks over at Talent Intelligent, who did all this amazing research looking at roles and practices and what makes leaders and managers effective. And if you've had an opportunity to see or be exposed to any of the talent intelligent cards and card sort methodology, right there, card number 10, under a critical leader role and practice is using humor. And Roger, I really want to thank you because all my teachers in elementary school who said I'm not going to be able to get through life just laughing and making a fool of myself. Thank you for validating some of who I am and showing that no, humor is actually really important, particularly if you're doing leadership development, coaching work, trying to help people be more effective in the workplace. So thank you again, Roger.
You're welcome.
I wish my third grade teacher was around to see this. In Roger's library and Bob's and Talent Intelligent, they talk about using humor or appreciating the humor of others. Leaders have to be attuned to setting audience, purpose for the humor, and so forth. The absence of humor, I'm skipping down, often results in a leader as being seen as cold and indifferent and resulting in a cascade of negative associations. And I really have seen that, and I believe that. And I actually think, so not only has humor helped me connect with people and engage with people as a coach, consultant, and facilitator, Team Intelligent also says, look, in the range or the continuum of how hard or difficult it is to develop some of these behaviors or practices, humor falls about mid-range, which means you don't necessarily, it's not a skill that's impossible to develop. It's not necessarily easy to develop. And when we say, well, what are we looking for? Again, if you're familiar with Team Intelligent tools, you flip these over, and these are the kinds of things we know can help make a leader more effective in the workplace. Now, I have found if it's not, folks, if it's not your natural orientation, if it's sort of not part of the way you typically coach or consult or train or facilitate, if you are not necessarily seen as, quote, being a very funny person, you may have a hesitancy or reluctancy to use humor for the reasons Roger said earlier. It's a bit of a risk. And I'm not sure I can do it and want to do it or know how to do it effectively in a way that's not going to offend or insult. But I have found in my experience when I talk to other folks like you and I ask them this question, do you intentionally apply humor in a work environment? And they go, well, what do you mean intentionally? I say, well, look, not just being coincidentally funny. I think many of us say funny things or can laugh at a story or joke, but do you have intentionality around it as you might use another tool or another technique or some kind of flow chart or something that's in your toolkit as a coach, trainer, facilitator, whatever? Is humor part of your intentional toolkit? Most folks tell me no. So today I want to do a quick, I was going to do a poll. Evidently, we're having a bit of a technological issue with our polling, not to panic since we all know the chat room works. Here's what I'd love for you to do. Answer this question in the chat box if you're willing to. How skilled do you feel you are in applying humor intentionally and effectively in work environments? And by that, I mean, again, your own role, coach, HR person, consultant, trainer, facilitator, whatever it is, in your role, how skilled are you in applying humor with intentionality and effectiveness? Twos, ones, threes, 1, 5, somewhat, 4, 3, 2. Wow, 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 wow. Okay, most folks coming in around somewhat skilled to somewhat unskilled, I think. Okay, really good, real good range. Well, look, here's the good news. It's one of the things I say about funny business. So funny business was born as a result of kind of this question that I've been asking folks to say, okay, for those who'd like to feel more skilled in it and more intentional about it, can I take some of the work I have been doing, kind of fragmented and incidentally, if you will, and systematize it and make it a process and a methodology that other people could use and do? And hence, drum roll please. I don't have any drums. Funny Business was born. And you're going, what's Funny Business? Well, it's a deck of 100 professionally curated, I'm going to talk about that in a minute, one panel business themed cartoons depicting more than 60 common work related topics. And so the deck looks just like this: 100 cards, one cartoon on each one panel cartoon. Exists in both hard copy and electronic formats. And for that, the reason for that, really quickly, I had developed Funny Business a little over a year and a half ago, got out a lot of hard copy decks, and then folks were saying to me in the face of COVID, Paul, gee, I'm doing all my work remotely now, and how can I use Funny Business online or in a Zoom meeting or in a webinar or when I'm coaching someone online? So long story short, I had to go back, lawyers, all this nonsense, and actually got permission to create a virtual deck as well. So Funny Business exists as a download of these same 100 cartoons in an electronic format. Okay. Who can use Funny Business? Well, I've already alluded to it. Again, I'm not going to read the bullet point list to you there, but at the bottom, by anyone who wants to create a safe space to have catalytic conversations between and among people regarding work issues. That was the intent of Funny Business. It was around creating conversations, catalytic conversations, uncovering deeper truths, getting people to talk about work-related themes and problems and issues and concerns via the methodology of humor and cartoon imagery. And so what I like to say about Funny Business, again, with humor used appropriately, it should create safe space between and among people. When we can laugh together, a lot of defense mechanisms break down. When we can laugh, a lot of honesty and truth may come out. When we can laugh, we have something in common. And so Funny Business is a methodology about putting something in the middle, putting something between people. Now, if any of you are familiar with Center for Creative Leadership or have used any of their methodology or CARD's methodology, for example, quick show of hands, actually, I can see a lot of you on screen. How many have ever heard of Visual Explorer, Metaphor Explorer, any of these Explore things, okay? If you've used any of those, Funny Business is not very much different. If you're using Teamtelligent products and their card sort, in some sense, you're familiar with card and card-based methodology. So it's not actually a new methodology, but the medium and the subject matter and the topic, I believe, is, or at least I hadn't seen anything else out there similar to this. So let me pause, because if we were face to face, I'd realize I'm yapping far too much, and just pause right now and say, questions, comments, thoughts at all around goals, objectives for today, what we're doing, what Funny Business is, what it can do or not do, anything at all. Put a question in the chat box or raise your hand or do something. Let me see.
While people are commenting, Paul, I'll just share that I have been using the digital file in a number of webinars and conversations with different organizations. And true to form, people have been very responsive, and it's nice to see the smiles in a Zoom call when people are looking and they're reacting to a cartoon, and then start sort of asking them to share what their thoughts are, what does it prompt in their thinking about the issue at hand. Is very generative in terms of the way people have interpreted the cartoon and what caused it to be humorous for them.
Thank you. LM, I see you put a message. You use something called Square Wheels. Haven't seen it. I need to look into that. Fantastic. Is it card based?
I'm going to date myself and tell you it was transparencies, and it had like a cart with square wheels, and it was all about change and change management. And it had all these overlays with alligators and crazy things. And I know he changed the methodology because I remember having a hard time finding a projector, but it started like that.
Well, look, I I'm actually not being a smart ass now, right? But case in point, how many years ago was that for you?
About 20,
Okay.
15.
Oh, cool. But you still remember the humor,
It
right?
was funny. It was
Right.
definitely funny.
Back to the durability of humor and how it stays with us. By the way, the other funny thing about that, LM, I was cleaning out one of my New Year's resolutions was clean out a lot of folders and everything. I was embarrassed by how many transparency slides I still had, and very wide ties. Okay, I'm going to show you a cartoon. Oh, I wasn't supposed to do that. My producer is going to yell at me. I'm going to show you a cartoon that's actually not in the funny business deck. No, Thursday's out. How about never? Is never good for you? How many of you have ever seen this cartoon? A couple of you. This is actually a relatively or very well-known business cartoon. Its author is Bob Mankoff. And the reason why I tell you that is Bob Mankoff may not be a household name to you, but Bob Mankoff was the editor-in-chief of the New Yorker, the cartoon section, for like 17 years. He was responsible for taking the 1,000 to 2,000 submissions of cartoons every week the New Yorker would get and picking out the dozen or so that would ultimately make the magazine. Bob's really very well known and respected in these circles. In fact, he's been on 60 Minutes and has been featured in all kinds of business publications and periodicals and so forth. The reason why I tell you this, when I say, well, these cartoons were professionally curated, not just by Paul, but I had some inside help from Bob Mankoff. And when I started to talk to Bob what I was doing and why I wanted to do it, and I found him via LinkedIn and everything, and a fabulous guy and an incredibly creative, real genius, fabulous guy. And I talked to him what I wanted to do. And he went into this incredible explanation about the different kinds of humor and what I would need to look for in my cards if they were going to work for the purposes I just said. And I want to just talk to you about this really quick, because I think if you're going to use these cards, it will be important to understand how they were built, or if you will, the research based behind them. And so just know these cards were not randomly or willy-nilly picked by being torn out of magazines by Paul going, oh, hell, that one looks amusing. There was quite a bit of rhyme and reason to it. So some of the things Mankoff taught me about how to find the appropriate cartoon is there needs to be a playful incongruity or a benign violation in each cartoon. So when many of you said at the outset, or Roger said, gee, humor is great as long as it's not offensive or inappropriate, Mankoff particularly agrees for these purposes, but there needs to be enough of a tension that stirs somebody. It should make them somewhat uncomfortable, an incongruity, a bit of a violation. Something is amiss. If it's not amiss or incongruent enough, you don't get laughter, you don't get tension, you don't get emotion. And if it's too much, you get revulsion or revision or people disengaging. And so these cartoons were, how do we find that sweet spot of getting a benign violation, a bit of an incongruity or polarity or paradox has to be inherent in each one. For our purposes, many of these cartoons aren't necessarily ha-ha funny, but they try to be and should be aha funny. You don't need a belly laugh when you use cartoons for this purpose. It's great if they can do that, but what they should be doing, remember, helping people to have catalytic conversations, deepen truths, create narrative, create understanding, limit boundaries between people, understand context, environment, their own journey, whatever it is, as it applies to work. And so the key to a good cartoon is, what's the aha in it? Where does someone go, oh yeah. Now, given how I saw these cartoons being used, obviously they have to have a reasonable connection to business or workplace issues. Many of these cartoons don't necessarily take place in work or in a work environment, but the theme, the connection, the playful incongruity, the aha-ness can be applied to work or the workplace. And ultimately, main cause said, Paul, if this is going to work, the joke has to be on the person reading it. The playful joke. That is, people need to see themselves in it in some way, either as the protagonist or antagonist. By the way, sometimes in business cartoons, the antagonist isn't even present in the cartoon. It's the man, it's the system, it's the structure, it's the bureaucracy that the person, the protagonist in the cartoon, is kind of rebelling against, if you will, or having a reaction to or a reaction against. And so the way these cards were curated was not only with this in mind, but looking, so I have to admit, this was me for several months, reading and researching and scrolling through cartoon databases. And I will tell you, to get this deck of 100, I'd be embarrassed to tell you how much of my life I've spent reading cartoons. Thousands and thousands of thousands to get to these that I felt fit this criterion, and then gave them to independent panel of experts, folks like you, to do sorting and all this stuff and crazy. So there we are. So that's what I mean by professionally curated. Now, that said, the other thing you should know about the cartoons is, so there's 100 cartoons, great. And I said they could be used all by people in all different kinds of walks of life related to business. And you go, well, what for? So remember, there needs to be a playful incongruity. There needs to be a subject or topic that relates to business. What are those topics? As fate would have it, these 100 cartoons load across these 60 different topics. You'll be very pleased that I'm not reading you this PowerPoint overhead. But take a second and just sort of look through that. The reason why I wanted you to see this is, depending on, again, your role and how you interface in business with business people, whatever, there may be certain subjects or topics you want to specifically broach. Hey, Paul, I'm working with a sales team and marketing team, and I'm wondering, do you have any cartoons that pertain to that? Paul, I'm coaching someone on leadership, and I think they're struggling with accountability issues. Do you have any cartoons on that? I'm working with an organization, they're young, they're a startup, they really haven't even worked on their mission statement yet, or I have an organization in questioning or pushing back on what they should be doing. Do you have cartoons that pertain to that topic? So there they are. These are the topics covered. So now you may be thinking, well, Paul, but if I really use this deck, that's a little bit mind-numbing. So if I wanted to actually work with someone or a team or a group or an organization on one of these topics, I got to sort through the whole deck. No, it's your lucky day. Because the deck also comes with a topical cross-reference. So the cards are numbered 1 through 100. And then you say, oh my God, I'm working with people in an organization or a team, for example, that's struggling with conflict. Dealing with it effectively, acknowledging it, uncovering it, talking about the benign violations, if you will, embedded in conflict. Okay, well now you know what specific cards to pull out of the electronic or the virtual deck, so you don't always have to play with a full deck. That was a joke. It is okay now to laugh at that. That was.
Too bad we're muted because we're laughing here.
Okay, thank you, Kathy. Because okay, but truly, so the deck is not meant to be unwieldy. Like you got to take the whole 100 cards with you every time you're trying to do something with it. If you understand the person, the context, and maybe some topical areas, this can help you narrow it. By the way, you'll notice some of these numbers are in red and some not. Because the deck, although it's an intact, complete deck, the first 30 cards, 1 through 30, tend to be more applicable when you're working with an individual coaching context, an individual performance context, an individual leadership development context, an individual mentoring context. So the cards tend to, individual career development issues, right? Those issues at which may be more pertain or germane to an individual and how he or she navigates work-related issues. The other cards, 31 through 100, are more when you're working with teams, groups, and entire organizations. So already one cut I tell folks is, for example, if you're a coach and the primary work you do is individual coaching and you don't really work with teams or groups or consult for organizations or do webinars or presentations or facilitations or training programs or open enrollment program, whatever, then you could largely focus on those cards 1 through 30 and probably be really effective in using humor. Now, that said, quite honestly, the more you get familiar with the range of topics and cards in this deck, you will find this isn't an ironclad rule. Some of the individual cards tend to, or can at times help teams and groups and organizations, and sometimes those team and organization cards resonate with an individual, okay? But this is a way to kind of get started in terms of understanding what's in the deck. All right. Questions, comments, anything at all at this point about the deck, how it's built? Let me check my chat box here. What do you think of non-links on this over? LM, do you want me to comment on this? What do you think about the relevancy?
Yeah, some people tend to, when they're, and this is more facilitating, tend to kind of be funny, but often some non-content related realms. So people go, oh, that was great, but it didn't mean anything to the content or make it memorable like you're talking about. So I'm wondering, does this context in terms of your parameters help with that?
I hope it does. And this is what I said. People ask me, and if I already said this today, forgive me, but people say, well, Paul, I'm not funny. I can't use funny business. I'm not good at humor. I don't have a sense of humor. And I say, perfect. That's what this was built for. Because I'm not looking for people who are great stand-up comedians or can tell jokes or anecdotes or stories off to the side. If you do that or can do that or have the ability to do that and it enhances who you are as a trainer, facilitator, coach, teacher, mentor, boss, terrific. But funny business, LM, intentionally puts a boundary, in your words, I think it's a really good one, to say, let's use humor to uncover a deeper truth, to get at something very specifically we're trying to learn together. And so, and they are related to business related topics. So yeah, it's a great observation. So yes, I hope funny business helps you stay within appropriate bounds with humor and not feel like you have to be a spontaneous stand-up comedian or, you know, smart ass in my case. Ready to see some? All right, I'm going to show you a few cartoons so you kind of get a feel for what the deck is. I know I said I wasn't going to read some of this stuff to you, but I lied. I probably will read some of these captions to you. All right, here we go. Now remember, before I show you these real quick, remember many funny business cartoons don't take place in a traditional work environment. All right, here we go. Here's one in a therapist's office. Guy laying on the couch with his therapist. Your fear of being publicly exposed as a fraud is a stress-related disorder called Imposter Syndrome. It's common among people in high-profile authority positions and, of course, in actual phonies like you. Bunch of sheep sitting around a table. We are well positioned, but we lack leadership. We're going to feel some pain today. We're removing that Band-Aid we put on the problem. But what if the guy in the bleachers is right? What if I do suck? The buck pauses, but does not actually stop here. Here's a guy dressed as a superhero getting on an elevator at work. It used to be all about truth and justice. Now, mostly I fight for market share. I couldn't have said it better myself, Sarah, so I'll just repeat it a little louder. I bet some of you ladies can appreciate that one. For fun, let's see if your advice supports what I've already decided to do. This is Abramson, our new piñata. Miss Adamson, pluck someone from nowhere and put him in a position of responsibility. Question for you, and I'd love for you to come off mute now. What just happened in the last minute or so?
Well,
What was my evil secret master plan?
I don't know, but on that last one, first of all, I just thought of every talent management meeting I've ever been in.
You thought of what?
Every talent management meeting
Oh.
I've ever been in. I'll just
Right.
pluck somebody out of nowhere.
What happened on a kind of a macro level, meta level? Let me ask it this way. If you were me sitting here looking at all of you on your icon, what do you think your picture here, whatever they call it, what do you think I saw?
Well, probably our facial expressions changed a little bit.
Keep going, Colby. What else?
I just, our shoulders probably moved and a smile maybe. I don't know, at least that's what I felt internally. I'm not sure if that's what I gave you in my indication, Paul, but that's what I was feeling inside.
Yeah. Well, what I like to say is even in the space of about a minute, a bit, the emotional tone of a group can change through the use of humor. And so one of the things I've done with this is an activity that I just kind of did with you. I will oftentimes start a presentation on EQ with something like this and say, well, I just want to start with some cartoons today. Or sometimes in the middle of an engagement, or I'm doing a coaching, training program or something, or I have to work with people that I don't really think want to be in the room. They were kind of told to go or sent to training. And I will do this activity and we'll talk about, look, honestly, tell me what was your mood, feeling, everything before, and what is it now? Now, I'm not saying there's a huge, profound shift necessarily, but it is interesting, again, how humor can helps people understand the power and the importance of changing the tone or mood of a group very quickly. Now, I hope none of you came in here too, not unwilling to be here today or too feeling held hostage, but I've seen a pretty big effect sometimes with people around EQ issues. Okay, the other reason I wanted to show you these cartoons is to say, remember, here's what I want you to kind of get good at if you're going to use this deck. Let's take this first one, right? Your fear of being publicly exposed as a fraud, right? What is the playful incongruity here, or what themes are embedded here? Why on earth would I put this in a deck that's supposed to be helping somehow people related to business? What does this have to do with anything? I will give you a hint. I use it when I'm coaching individuals. This is one of the cards, 1 through 30. I'm working with an individual in a coaching context. What is it that I'm hoping maybe that person gets an insight, an awareness, an aha, something?
Well, the words go ahead.
Go ahead. You go, Lisa.
I was just going to say the imposter syndrome thing in terms of 360 feedback. Sometimes people reveal things that, they're just faking it till they make it. And sometimes that's a resonating thing in their development session.
Yeah, that's certainly the imposter syndrome and how that can get in the way of folks' development. Michael, you had something as well?
And your self-talk might tend towards catastrophizing. What's the worst possible thing that could happen to me today? And it might look just like that, except that, of course, it's not going to happen.
Very good. So around self-talk, keep going. Who else? Give me a theme, or give me what's the playful incongruity going on here? What's the tension?
There are several layers of tension for me. One is, number one, a caring psychologist would never say to the client, oh, by the way, you are a phony, so your feelings are quite appropriate, you imposter, you. That tension is pretty acute in looking at this. and alternately thinking to yourself, how in the world do I get a person to understand this conversation that's going on in themselves, looking for some sort of affirmation, which of course we would never do. And yet we know that's precisely what the person is wanting to have us do for them.
Roger, really good. And in fact, to your first point about the quote therapist being inappropriate, yes, so imposter syndrome, authenticity, voice in your own head, all these things. And given what this therapist is doing, guess what kind of coachees I oftentimes use this card on? Coachees who I suspect, feel, have heard from the boss, whomever, don't really want coaching. And what I'll talk to them about is, again, what's kind of a truth embedded in this? Or I'll say to them, tell me honestly, is that your fear? Is this guy's fear about the therapist an analogous fear you might have about me? That as your coach, I'm going to say or do something that's going to make you feel embarrassed or uncomfortable, or I'm here to quote, expose you. And it's amazing the conversations I've had with people who didn't want to do coaching, who say, yeah, honestly, that's some of it. I feel like I'm on a therapist so far. I don't necessarily want to start talking about my personality profile to you. Okay? We just put a truth in the middle of the table. We took an incongruity and we used a cartoon. Now it gives us something to talk about. So this person had a fear or a bit of a pushback around being vulnerable to a professional. That's the theme of the cartoon. That's the playful incongruity. So it's in those contexts that I would use this one along with some of the other ones, Michael and Ellen, you've mentioned as well. Okay, example. Let me do another one. This is one that we used. Again, doesn't take place in a work environment, but what if that guy in the bleachers is right? What if I do suck? Where might I use this cartoon, or where might you use it?
I love this one.
What does this have to do with? How does it apply to business?
Well, embracing feedback, you know, can I look at feedback and question it versus just blow it off because I've heard it before?
Really good. Keep going. Yes. What else? What's the tension?
I was just going to add, to me, it reminds me of a lot of the discussions we have inside the organization around automatic negative thoughts, or the voices in our heads that tell us that we do suck. So even in a coaching environment, what's the noise, right, in our heads that we start to buy into that may not have a basis of truth?
Very good.
Well, and the other piece is, at the moment, at this point in the game, the last thing I need is for you to doubt your confidence.
Sure.
Yeah, this one has to do with all those things. So I use it when I'm coaching people around saying those issues. What in this cartoon resonates for you? What does it speak to? And I'll get to that in a bit about how to open up these conversations. But look, this is about, among other things, feedback. What's the incongruity? The incongruity is, well, on one level, we say we want feedback, or we teach feedback is good and you should be open and receptive to feedback. We say that, but the incongruity is, the playful incongruity is, yeah, but I'm not sure I want to hear it. I'm not sure I want to feel exposed by it. I'm not sure once I've given this to folks before they look at their 360. When we look at your 360, are you going to feel like that quarterback at all? Well, why? Well, who are the people in your bleachers? Who's being unfairly judgmental to you? Who do you feel that they're judging you and looking at you inappropriately? So, by the way, let's go back to protagonist, antagonist. Are you the protagonist here? Does this feel like you at times? By the way, the quarterback's talking to another player, like trusting and confiding in that person around some of their feelings about fear of feedback. Who, if anyone, is that person for you? Is that me? If it's not, that's fine. Is it someone at work? Who can you be honest and authentic about your hesitancy and reluctance to kind of get feedback or go over this report or take it seriously? Right? This is what I mean around finding the incongruity, understanding the incongruity in the theme of the card, and then how do you kind of evoke that in someone? All right, questions?
No, I just had a comment,
Please.
and the thing that pulled it together for me, I thought it was interesting, piggybacking on what Garrick was saying, is that you take that negative thought process in your brain and it actually helps you articulate it. What if I do suck, as opposed to it's in my brain and it's actually out here and maybe we deal with it. And then what you were just saying is interesting, that he's talking to another player. I think the question in a coaching scenario might be, who's your safe harbor? If it's not me as the coach, it's, do you have a confidant? Do you have a, friend at work that you tell your crap to,
This one more real quick. By the way, I was going to put you in breakout rooms. I don't think we have time to do that. I don't want to run over anybody's time today. So some of this we would have been doing in breakout rooms. But anyway, tell me where you think I use this card. What is the subject or issue I'm dealing with someone on in an individual coaching context? What are they thinking about doing in the real world? I'm coaching them.
Staying where they are, doing exactly what they've always done, or, I could see this one as, I didn't do all the hard work that I needed to do to change.
Oh, very good. Yeah, good. And keep going. What else? What else could a person I'm coaching be dealing with while I want to put this card in the middle? What's the fear? What's the playful incongruity here? What's the message?
Whatever I want to do isn't going to be the right thing to do, and it won't work out.
Because why? Why isn't going to work out? What's going to happen?
I'll starve on the streets.
There you go. The playful incongruity is, gee, I'm told, and by people like you, Paul, you coaches and therapists and counselors and psychologists, follow your bliss, do that. But you know what, Paul? Easy for you to say, hey, if your organization sucks, leave it. But yeah, this is how I feel. No, I hate my job and I hate my company. I hate my boss. I hate everything about it. I'd love to go open a bed and breakfast, but yeah, I do secretly feel like I don't want to be this guy. I don't want to be this protagonist in this picture 6 months from now.
It helps them articulate their catastrophe fantasy.
Exactly. Right. Okay. Right. And so, and again, well, like, who's the antagonist here, by the way? Well, it's crazy. I actually asked someone that once. Okay, if that's you, who are you fighting against? Who do you think it was, by the way? Who could it be? Their family, their spouse, their parents, their friends, people who are going to see them as a failure. The antagonist was the big organization that had them held hostage because of their health care plan that they needed, all these other things. And so this person who had a high level of career dissatisfaction realized, until he or we, through coaching, could deal or reconcile with some of these other issues depicted in this cartoon, it was going to get hard to get him unfrozen, to think about other options, because he was paralyzed because he did see himself in this particular cartoon. Okay. Blah, 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 blah. All right. So very quickly, I was going to have you do some of that in breakout rooms. I also said one of the objectives for today was to talk about how to use this deck. Looks like I got some extra. I don't know. Anyway, whoa. Okay. Is my graphic coming in clear? Okay, great. Let me talk about a context. I've already alluded to it. So one use of this deck is for those of you who do coaching, those of you who do individual leadership development, those of you who are doing career counseling. I'm not going to spend a lot of time here. I'll give you the copy of the deck. This is frankly very intuitive and very easy if you're already doing this kind of work. Okay, and I'm not teaching anything new here. No shocker, right? The way we coach people is kind of the way you use the funny business deck. You ask a framing or an open-ended question. You follow up, ask a framing or probing question. Something's wrong with this slide. Anyway, open up with a question, follow up with open-ended or probing questions, and then you look for themes or patterns that can help the client make connections back to work. Now, you can do this a couple different ways. So when I'm working with an individual, I know the deck well enough. In the middle of a coaching conversation, I may pull out the follow my bliss card and put it in front of the person and ask a framing question around it to get the conversation going. If I'm working with someone remotely or over Zoom, I have the electronic deck. I go, hey, hold on just a second. I want to send you a cartoon. Boom, in the moment, I send them the cartoon. So one way I can do it is by cartoon. Another way I could do it is, wow, I have a coaching session coming up with this person. I know they're struggling with a lot of career ladder issues and whether they should leave their job or not. Let me go to my cross-reference sheet, find 5 or 6 cartoons that pertain to what I think this person's issue is and use a subset of the deck. Okay. Now, the stuff you already know, which I, again, won't read you the deck. You start off the way we did today. You have to have a framing question. You'll be glad to know I'm not going to read this to you. Take a minute, though, and look at some potential framing questions. Again, I would say for those of you who have used, again, Center for Creative Leadership or other kinds of tools, Metaphor Explorer, Visual Explorer, you know, that you put a tool or something in the middle, the methodology is very much the same. You know, again, if you do this work, you know how to do this work. It's, you have to have a frame or trigger question. You don't just put a cartoon in front of someone and go, ha, isn't that funny? Great, but remember, we're going for aha, not ha. So to get to the aha, we need a good framing question. No shocker. Again, I'm not going to bore you to death. I know you know how to do this. I don't mean to insult you. And what comes after framing questions? Follow-up or probing questions. Some quick examples. By the way, I'm particularly biased to bullet point, second one from the bottom. You talk about a connection back to work. I ask that all the time. Show them a cartoon. Hey, is that theme, what we just talked about, is it connected to anything about your personality profiles and or your 360 results? Oh yeah. Well, in that cartoon, I realize this is a concern of mine and I come across this way at work. Or man, I realize I have a lot of issues around authority. And when I look at my 360, my boss said that. Oh, okay. So the cartoon is meant to ultimately make the connection back to the work, to the job, to the diagnostic, to the 360, to the personality profile. Okay. So there are, so again, process pretty easy. Open up with a intent, select cartoons that are appropriate for the context. Figure out a frame question to get the conversation going, having your toolkit, some appropriate follow-up or probes. And for me, the close of the loop is, well, how's that connected to what we're talking about today? How's that connected to work? How's that connected to your 360? How's that connected to you wanting to quit your job? How's that connected to you hating your boss? How's that connected to? Is it connected to? All right. Same methodology, by the way, if you're working with a team or a group. Again, same thing. You could use one card. I've oftentimes put out 20 cards pertaining to teams and groups. I've had the team select, hey, pick the 3 cards that are most germane to how this team functions. And you can see same kind of questions, just substituting your team instead of you. So this is not high level intellectual work. Now, obviously, this methodology can be multiplied when you're working with an entire organization. So for example, you're doing a consulting project and there's 80 people in the room from an organization, and you may want to use the whole deck, and you lay all the cards out on the floor and you tell everyone, hey, I want you to go pick out a card that speaks to a truth around how you believe you function in this organization, or a larger truth about this organization. You can do all kinds, again, with any card methodology, all kinds of subgrouping and people journaling and people processing and sorting of cards and voting on cards and on, right? The methodology is very similar to teams and groups and organizations. I'm not going to show all the probes and follow-up questions, know that they're there. I also said really quickly, you can use this as a diagnostic tool. So for example, remember, cards 1 through 30 are more pertinent to individual coaching situations, 31 through 100 to teams, groups, and organizations. I have done this to actually, don't laugh, start a coaching engagement. Before session number 1, I have done this. I've sent the deck of 1 to 100 at times, sometimes 1 through 30 to a client. Hey, what I want you to do, I explain about the deck. I simply want you to go through and look at the cards and tell me the ones you connect with or that speak to you, because somehow they relate to your job, boss, team, or work environment. Don't worry if you don't even know the exact connection, but they resonate with you. So I'll give the client a specific framing question to think and sort through cards. I'll say, pick 10 or 15 that resonate with you because you think they speak to a larger truth about you, your boss, your job, your work environment. Guess what? I take those cards, I look at the cross-reference table, and I find out 90% of them pertain to conflict. And I go, oh my God, gee, Joe, I'm seeing a theme here in these cartoons that you seem to have difficulty with conflict, whether it's with your boss or on a team or with your, or is that something in our coaching engagement might be useful to talk about? And then sometimes I'll go through the cartoons and tell him why I think that. And we'll kind of walk through the cartoons. Oh, you said this resonates you. Well, let's talk about the theme of conflict in the cartoon. Right, so that's a bit how to use it as a diagnostic. Okay, I want to be really respectful of your time. So to tell you this, for those of you who've hung in here to the brutal end, if you are interested in getting a deck, either virtual or hard copy, go to funnybusinesscartoons.com. And just for you, just for today, just for attending here today, you get the turtlebacks, you get the year's supply of rice-a-roni. And if you at checkout type in TT50, Talentelligent 50, you will get a 50% discount, which is the highest discount I've ever offered to anybody since the creation of Funny Business Cards. And I wanted to offer to all of you today, particularly as a thanks to Roger and the folks at Team Intelligent for hosting. So you can do that. We are officially done just in time. You can relax your Zoom face. Please know that I am more than happy to stay on the call here if you have questions or comments or chat box or whatever. I'm not in a hurry, so I'm hang around till the last one of you leave. If you have any or want to, if you have to run today but want to talk more about this, you have my email. Roger has my email. I'd love to hear from you and talk to you more about uses of the cards or how they may be useful in your particular journey.
There are a couple of questions that popped up in the chat space. And what we can do is simply, if you want to take just a minute, the one that I thought came up here toward the end that folks might like to hear a little bit about is, as a diagnostic, have you ever been unnerved by a pick that a client has made and found yourself, of course, that you've really triggered their defense script, and did that get in the way of the coaching interaction?
Yeah, great question, LM. Um, can it trigger defenses? Sure. Honestly, I wouldn't say I've been unnerved. And again, I'm not here to flatter myself. Given how these cards were developed and finding that space around a benign violation or a bit of an incongruity, I've never had them trigger. It can trigger a defense mechanism, but I've never had anyone get triggered beyond that. That said, by the way, I did this presentation once. There were a lot of clinicians in the room, and I said, look, at some point, back to Roger's point at the beginning, we do have to use our judgment with humor as well. If you think the card is inappropriate or that person's sensitivity is high, clearly don't use it, or don't use this methodology at all. I'm actually not, married to it. It's not appropriate all the time with every client and context. And so that's where some good professional judgment has to come in. But I've never seen anyone totally wig out over this. In fact, if anything, even that nervous laughter, that defense mechanism can be helpful. And sometimes I'll ask that, well, geez, just tell me why. I hear a bit of a nervous laughter, right? And sometimes that's helpful too. Great question.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Paul, for sharing with us today and giving us a practical way to approach using humor in the work that we do. And it's a real contribution that you did all that sorting through cartoons. They've got legal permission to prepare a product that people can access and use, and you went the extra step to help us organize those cartoons so that we could choose according to need. So thank you so much. And I know everybody who participated today and who may in fact looking at this in the future will be grateful to have access to a very well done and accessible way to use humor.
Thanks, Roger. I appreciate it. I just put up this last cartoon because I've had people say to me, well, Paul, I don't want to use your deck. Can I use my own cartoons? And I'd say, yeah. But to what Roger alluded to, getting copyright permissions is kind of a bitch. Yes. Thanks you all for your time today. Appreciate it.